Marc Speichert, Global CMO of L'Oreal Group. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about the context for your role. You've been at L'Oreal Group for 4 years, and you've had increasingly ascendant roles. You just recently were named Global CMO, and you've come up through overseeing U.S. and then Americas. Talk a little bit about sort of what has been your singular defining marching orders in your mind as CMO of L'Oreal.
It's been an incredible journey. I started 4 years ago, as you said, and kind of the ambition at the time was to create this CMO organization which didn't exist at L'Oreal. And I think we had 2 main objectives. The first was to make sure we really wanted to accelerate innovation. We've been a fantastic innovation creator on the product side, but how do we make sure we continue to innovate at the product level, but also very much innovate from a go-to-market perspective, from a media perspective, from a digital perspective. And so that's been kind of my big push, making sure we're combining the 2 to really kind of take us to the next level from a growth perspective.
So clearly, consumer insights, I'm sure, have been driving that, right, in global trends. Why was it so imperative that you really invest in media innovation and digital innovation?
It's fascinating to me because beauty, I think, is a very special category in regards to what's happening today in terms of today's transformation, because it's a category where the consumers are very, very involved. And so we know that roughly in a given year, we have 4 billion searches on beauty on Google. Mm-hmm. So it just gives you a feel for how passionate the consumer is about the category and how much they're actually just serving up insights just by just searching. And that gives us a humongous amount of insights in terms of what we want to do in regards to product innovation, but also obviously activation as well.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about this, as you mentioned, the CMO organization. Now, as I understand it, the organization was quite fractured prior to your coming on board and really wanting to consolidate and sort of create CMO roles around the globe, correct?
Correct.
Why was that so important, and what can other marketers learn from that model? Is it applicable elsewhere?
I think what's been fascinating is obviously the organization has been incredibly successful without having that transversal layer. So how do we make sure we don't break that, but at the same time add value on top? And so I think because of the digital transformation that's happening and the marketing reinvention that goes with it, we thought it was important to have someone that kind of puts the puzzle back together. And I think that's something that we're able to show value to the business. For example, we are the only beauty company, going back to your consumer centricity comment earlier, that are really operating in all the different channels of distribution, right? We play within the mass division with brands like Maybelline and L'Oréal Paris. We play within the luxury division with brands like Kiehl's or Lancôme. We play in the salon division with brands like Kérastase or Redken, and then we play in the pharmacy channel with brands like SkinCeuticals or Vichy, right? So we had a very good kind of understanding of the consumer within each of the channels of distribution before we set up that transversal CMO organization, because you had insights, market research experts in each of the divisions, but you didn't have that transversal overview. And the reality is, in today's world, the consumer and the shopper is moving from one channel to the other, and we felt that it was a competitive advantage to actually have that transversal view of the consumer and the shopper, and therefore centralizing that insights market research function just made a lot of sense.
Let's talk some specifics with regard to your digital innovation.
Sure.
I've heard that you're creating your own Pinterest-like page. In the May issue of Cosmo, you did a cover takeover, so you're doing a lot of innovation with media and certainly with digital. How much are you sort of a test and learn environment? Are you willing to take risks? What are your limits with regard to the Michelle Phan example? That's really bringing in a whole new voice and a whole new influence into your brand management.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about your comfort level with all that.
Sure, of course. I think one of the first things that we did with the team 4 years ago when I started was to gather all the marketing and digital IMC folks and ask them to tell us a little bit about what their pain points were in regards to their jobs. And one of them was innovation, in terms of driving innovation from a go-to-market, from a media, from a digital perspective, right? And so, because on one hand we have this incredible machine that develops new products and very efficiently, and it's a model that we fine-tune over the years, and that works really, really hard. How do we make sure we marry that, as I mentioned earlier, to this go-to-market innovation machine as well? So of course we need to nail the basics, and often I think people forget that you need to do the basics before you innovate, but
Yeah.
you need to do both successfully. And so coming out of that discussion that we had back 4 years ago, we decided that we needed to protect a pool of money that helps us drive that innovation, right? Because often either there's no money, or the general manager is uncomfortable about doing something different, or there's no sharing amongst the brands in regards to what they're doing from an innovation perspective.
So you carved out, you actually created?
Exactly. So we created a fund called the Next Fund, which is an innovation fund. That is a pool of money that we set aside to drive experimentation and innovation.
Out of the marketing budget?
Out of the marketing
Okay.
budget. And so we manage out of the CMO team. So I have a person that's dedicated, actually 2 people that are dedicated to managing that Next Fund in partnership with the brands, of course. And so we agree on what the strategic kind of focus areas are. So we're not experimenting in a million different directions,
Yeah.
but we're very clear on what are
It's
the
like
specific
organized
areas.
chaos. it sounds
Organized
like.
and orchestration really of
Sure.
what the innovation is. And so the deal with the brands is to say, okay, submit a request against that strategic pillar, and then we'll allocate a grant if we think it fits the criteria. And so they get the grant, and then what we ask the brands in return is to make sure that they're open to actually sharing the learnings and then scaling that solution across the organization if it's successful.
So describe for me what you would characterize as your biggest marketing challenge.
I think, one of the things that I learned in my marketing career is how you create kind of simple frameworks that people can understand and then use to drive change. And so, one of the frameworks that we've been using at L'Oréal is the path to purchase framework that helps you really think differently about how, you get consumers to convert, buy your product, and then repeat your products, right? And so it moved away from more of a push model that's been kind of what the organization has been using very effectively in the past, to a much more complex kind of path to purchase that goes through 4 big steps, consideration, driving awareness, evaluation, which in our categories, I talked about Michel Fan earlier, is critical to help you how to recreate a look that you see in an awareness tactic, beautiful TV or print ad, right? How do you make sure you bring that down to the consumer and explain how to create that beautiful look, right?
Yeah.
Which is huge. I talked about 4 billion searches. The people are asking for more information, and you need to be there and provide that. The buy phase obviously is totally transforming with the emergence of e-tailers and the transformation of retailers into e-retailers, and how do we come to the table and help in that transformation. And then obviously the loyalty piece and driving advocacy behind our brands and how you do that effectively. Tons of discussion in terms of social strategies and what you should be doing. Well, for me, social is in all the 4 steps of the path to purchase, but obviously specifically in the advocacy phase, and how you do that effectively and is obviously critical. And so for me, it's like, how do you help provide people with something very simple that they can just look at and then challenge themselves in saying, okay, my marketing plan, did I really hit on all the 4 steps of the path to purchase? Are they connected? Is my content adapted to the different steps? I think is really important.
And you just brought it up, but the word content is such a buzzword right now.
Yes.
How are you approaching content and thought leadership right now? How does that play out?
I think it's a great question, and it's a huge focus area for us. And we started in a very kind of pragmatic way, which is to just have very good visibility of what we actually have content-wise. Because I think the natural starting point is to actually start something from scratch. And in some instances, it comes because we don't necessarily had good visibility in terms of what are the assets we have to begin with.
Right.
And so, we just finished a huge exercise where we went pretty granular on understanding, okay, how many videos have we actually created this year? How many agencies have been using to actually create this? How much did we spend? What's the level of performance and quality? And did those meet the KPI? So just to kind of have like a really holistic view about
what you
all the
already
content
had.
that we already have.
Sure.
And then making sure that as a second step, then we talked a lot about how media that works and how that helps us through marketing mix studies, more data, help us make shifts in the areas that we know work hardest. But then also very importantly then move to content that works, because media that works plus content that works, that's better than just media that works, obviously. But and making sure that, we were talking about it a bit earlier today, how do you make sure that if you have a great brand story to tell, then how do you make sure that you're using that content framework to really make sure that every piece of content helps reinforce the bigger brand story?
Yeah.
And again, we talked about how brands are becoming more and more important, and I think the beauty about today's world and the digital revolution is that you can feed into the brand story much more so than you could ever before, and I guess the challenge is how do you make sure you don't create content in silo, that you need to find the right economic equation so that you can create content without exploding your production budgets, because you need thousands of pieces of content. You don't need one commercial. You need a lot of content that's adapted against the different steps. And so you're right. I think it's a really hot topic, but one that I think we need to approach very kind of pragmatically and with some discipline around it. Otherwise, I think it gets very messy quickly.